Hi everyone, good afternoon. My name is Brian Hayes. I'm CEO of the Banking and Payments Federation of Ireland, and you're very welcome to our series, our webinar series on the future of banking. Today's webinar is on the future of digital banking, and we had a great discussion last week. Over the next 2 weeks, we have 2 further webinars, and we look forward to your participation in both of those as well, because we have some really good people to hear from and listen to over the course of the next few weeks. I want to thank especially our partnership, BPFI's partnership with Deloitte in this important discussion. And I hope you find today's discussion of some use as well. I think a big issue for the banking industry is around digitalization. We know that in terms of the products and the services we provide for customers, how we actually provide those services and the kind of customer experience behind that is so essential to the future of banking and indeed payments in Ireland. A lot of the problems we face are around how we change as a banking industry while also keeping the lights on. It's a bit like open heart surgery. You know, the banks have to continue while at the same time it's changing. And that's a really important reality for banks that takes place right across the system. I suppose today's discussion is really around the future of digital banking, and especially around challenger banks and how exactly they're working out in terms of the change that is occurring. So we're delighted to have a great lineup today with David Conway, who is the head of customer and marketing at Deloitte, who's going to lead out a discussion for us about all of the issues around challenger banks and the kind of traction that they're getting in terms of industry right now. And that's going to be followed by a really good discussion between Joe Heneghan, who is CEO of Revolut, who you all know, and the head of innovation at Leveris, that's Conor McAleavey. So first I'd like to hand over to David Dalton, who's head of financial services at Deloitte. David's going to moderate the panel later, but he's also going to make some comments in terms of scene setting. David, over to you.
Thanks, Brian. And just to add my welcome to the second in this series of webinars. We had, as Brian said, we had a really good discussion last week on the future of fintechs. It was kind of interesting. Clearly, in the current environment, where COVID-19 restrictions have, moved the world to very much focus on digital and digital engagement. And the discussion focused on some of the challenges that fintechs had around, potentially down the road around access to funding. And for a lot of fintechs who are focused on building global businesses, how do they make the kind of impact that they need to globally in a very travel restricted environment? So a really interesting discussion. So today we're focused on the future of digital banking. In a moment, I'm going to hand over to David Conway, who's going to give a keynote, and then we're going to go to our panel of Joe, Conor, and Dave, actually, to explore the topic in a little bit more detail. But maybe just to set the scene a little bit, I think clearly everybody's familiar with the implications of COVID-19 and the restrictions of COVID-19. We've seen, a massive ramp up in digital engagement. I mean, in some ways, probably from a banking perspective, it kind of puts down some challenges, I guess, against the role of branches, the role of face-to-face, and indeed the need for cash. So some really interesting implications. But if we stand back a little bit, I guess, around this whole topic, this has been a journey, I guess, around digital banking that's been going on for some period of time. Probably starting off with internet banking, where banks have put, I guess, a lot of their traditional services on internet and on devices. And we've moved into kind of the next phase of that, which is really open banking, open APIs and much broader access. And we're going through that phase. And there's probably a phase beyond that, which is beyond open banking, and maybe that's around open customer. Maybe to kind of pose, I suppose, 2 or 3 kind of thoughts as to just think about as we kind of progress through this. One is, I guess, how important customer journey and customer experience will be in the future of digital banking. Secondly, to maybe emphasize ecosystems. And that would include fintechs playing within those ecosystems and the importance of collaboration across ecosystems. And maybe a final point, which is that I suppose the traditional model of building all of the banking services, the digitized banking services, may not be the right metaphor going forward. And maybe it's more a case of assembling that, particularly tying back to that ecosystem point. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to David Conway, who's the head of customer marketing for Deloitte. And Dave, you might share your perspectives around the future of digital banking.
Thanks, David, and welcome everybody. It's great to be here with you. I'm the partner who leads Deloitte Digital here in Ireland, and today, if we go to next slide, please. Today, I'm going to talk to you. Sorry, just back to the first one. Today, I'm going to talk to you about how to succeed with open banking by meeting unmet customer needs. Next slide, please. And very quickly, what I'm going to talk to you about, because we've got 10-15 minutes. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is the adventure that has been open banking so far. What we are specifically seeing as some of the challenges that face Irish banks today as they try to kind of really make success of open banking. What I've seen in my experience from working with and talking to the banks, what I see is the principal dilemma that is facing banks, which is whether to stick or to twist, and we'll get into that. What we see in Deloitte as the key to navigating that dilemma, which is essentially trying to really understand the different market segments that are out there and then meet their needs. And then lastly, I want to show you a brief proposition that Deloitte have designed and built, which hopefully brings that idea of meeting these unmet needs to life and should be a good example. So next slide, please. So the story so far. So if you go back to January 2018, the CMA mandated the 9 UK banks to provide regulated third-party access to payment accounts. Along then came PSD2, mandated by the EC, and what Irish banks have been busily doing is essentially evolving and adopting the UK open banking standard to bring PSD2 to bear in Ireland as of September last year. So that was great. We now have a platform in place after a lot of work. And so as we look into kind of 2020 and beyond, what's next? Well, one's clearly been a lot of work done. And I think if you worked on any of the PSD2 implementation teams, you could surely attest to that. And I think if you look wider in the market, you have over 300 registered third-party providers in the EU. You have 60 of those that are actually passporting into Ireland as it speaks. But, and if we go to the next slide, when you actually look at the market today, there's still relative little activity happening. In that, if you take consumer for instance, there's really only one example that's actually out there in the market today of how open banking has actually made it into the actual end customer's hands. Now, that example is Revolut. That's only a few weeks old, and so kind of alone it stands. And what essentially Revolut have done is they have opened up account aggregation across all the 6 banks into their app, which is great that it's there. It's great that it's out there. But it really is kind of the only man in the tent at this stage. As we look across, the banks in general, I think the word I would use to describe, as people are trying to come to terms with open banking, is one of newness. Banks are very much looking to upskill their people. They're trying to understand the business models and how best to adopt them. They're very much exploring new partnerships with people like Conway, Plaid, Fractal, and many, many others. But by and large, there's probably an inconsistency to the approach and maybe focus across the different banks. Some banks are actually definitely quite focused on it and probably making some good progress, but that wouldn't be the case in all parts. And I guess to add to that as well, probably even within banks, there's probably an inconsistent feeling as to how to deal with that. And I might touch on that briefly later. When you actually look at the APIs themselves and the journeys that have been implemented, even though they are to a standard, again, the story is one that the consistency probably is quite there. Like if you look at the Revolut example, when you look at the consent and customer authentication journeys that have been put in place, to enable the account aggregation, there's a wide variety of experiences that have been implemented. For some of the banks, it's a 2-step process. For others, it's a 9-step. So, clearly there's a lot of scope there for consistency, optimization, and I think that can only really stand to help drive market adoption if that's refined, which I'm sure it will be. I think the other story, though, as well at play is one of premium services and APIs. If you look at some of the the third-party providers, you're starting to see some really interesting that are coming out, which step that bit beyond, the base implementations. These are often things like financial categorization, insight into spends, insight into cash flow, to cash burn, and so on and so forth. And I think these are going to be really, really important journeys in APIs and services as we really look to capitalize on open banking. Now, so I guess in summary, these are probably the 4 friction factors which are maybe causing to slow things down. But if we go to the next slide, from my own experience of talking to lots of different people about Irish banks, I think the dilemma is a slightly deeper one. It's one of uncertainty, because banks actually really don't know whether to stick or to twist. You have the folks in the stick camp, and they're probably looking at open banking as, the preserve of fintechs in which they're a supplier. They're maybe thinking, let's just let this thing play out, because you know what, we want to resist the move into a switching market, because we've looked at what happened in telco and energy and insurance. That's kind of what played out there. Personally, I would hold that isn't going to be how this thing plays out, because I think the nature of financial products are very, very different to those offered by those industries, but that's maybe a story for another day. On the other hand, you've got the people in the twist camp, and they're very much looking as open banking as an opportunity to innovate, to bring new products and experiences to the market. And they're probably looking at some things that people may hold as a sacred cow, such as owning the current account, as maybe a less important thing, as opposed to the actual end experience or product that you're actually trying to deliver to the customer. Now, again, personally, I think, you could argue all day long about who's right or who's wrong. I think it's a bit of a religious argument. What we believe, in Deloitte certainly, is that the answer is really to look to the market, look to where the opportunity is. And if we go to the next slide, please. The key is really looking to the different market segments that are out there and trying to understand their unmet needs. And we did this across a wide range of segments. And what we found was that there was 2 segments that absolutely stood out, both in terms of the opportunity, in terms of the wallet and the prize that was out there, and also the actual degree to which their current needs weren't really being met. And these are the young affluent and SME business. If you look at the young affluent segment, these young affluents need things like being able to manage their subscriptions easily to things like Apple Pay, Netflix, so on and so forth, because that's how they consume. Like, they want to understand their spending habits, especially their discretionary spend. They want, things like their rent to be recognized as a contributor towards their credit worthiness, in case in future they want to get a mortgage or take a loan. They want to be able to sweep savings easily, out of their accounts into saving pots or funds, for a rainy day. And they want to be absolutely seamlessly and frictionlessly transfer money between different accounts and their peers and so on. On the other hand, again, if you look at the SME businesses, they want a one-stop shop. They want real-time insight into their finances. They want super tight cash control of their business. And they really want banks, if possible, or somebody to take the admin out of doing business. And above all else, they want advice they can trust. So if you look at those 2 segments side by side, you can see their actual unmet needs are quite different. And the irony is it actually might be the same person that lives in both segments, as a young affluent person who's also a small business owner or a sole trader. So you can see there that, a traditional approach to digital banking isn't perhaps going to solve the needs for both of these guys. So if we can go to the next slide. What I'm going to talk to you quickly about now is a project I've personally been working on for the last 2 years called Propel. It's a proposition that Deloitte have researched, designed, and engineered to capitalize on open banking, and really trying to solve the needs, the unmet needs of the SME business owner. If we go to the next slide. So we did a European-wide piece of research about 2 years ago. It's fairly extensive, but I guess in summary, what they came back and told us is that, firstly, the accountant, and actually not the bank, was the first person the SME turned to for financial advice. What they also told us was that 85% of them wanted all their financial products and services from one place, if at all possible. Now, unfortunately, nearly a third of them said that they didn't quite trust their bank to act in the best interests at all times, which is probably completely unfair. But even more of a worry, only 8% of them were planning to borrow money from the banks, which, to be honest, I think there's a loss on both sides, because small businesses need funds, and probably more so than ever given what's going on in the world. And banks, are really well positioned to supply that fund. So again, there's a problem to be unpicked for both parties in that regard. And then, what they came back resolutely saying is that 91% of them wanted transparent, real-time insights into their finance. And a lot of them as well just wanted to move away from that manual reliance on financial spreadsheets to manage their business. Next slide. So in response to this, we built Propel very quickly. Why did we build it? Well, one, we thought we could bring something to market that really did meet the unmet needs by essentially putting an accountant in your pocket. Now, only in Deloitte could that be probably considered a good thing, so don't dwell on the metaphor mentally. But really what this app is to do, it's to collect and aggregate financial data sources in one place so you can track cash flow, track filing deadlines, view your insights, and manage your business much more efficiently, essentially at the touch of the thumb. What we also thought at the time, and still believe now, is that we could occupy the white space, because we thought there was a lovely space in between, SMEs with traditional business banking accounts and the cloud accounting software to offer something which was a sweet spot in between. We also looked at the open banking legislation and the different advantages that were there through combining cloud, AI, and mobile, and we thought we could bring a really scalable proposition to a high volume of customers at low cost. And probably the biggest thing of all is we thought it was a way to reframe the entire value conversation with SME businesses by really building trust by offering insights, alerts, and notifications, really helping them run their business in a really practical way so that they developed a much deeper relationship with their bank. So that's why we did it. Go to the next slide. So what is it? It's an app that does cash flow, accounting, insights, alerts. There's lots of interesting stuff on the roadmap. I'm not going to drain the slides, so perhaps, Sinead, if we could go to the video, which I think gives a nice quick summary of what the app's all about. So thanks everybody. I'm just going to summarize the talk now, but really just to say as well, that wasn't a shameless plug for Propel, more just a way of showing an example of how you can meet those unmet needs. For me, the key takeaways again is succeeding with open banking, and through that really making the most impact in the future of digital banking is really embrace open banking, and get past the notion that you don't own the customer by opening the current account, especially in open banking. Secondly, really try and understand the target segment that you're after and their specific unmet needs, and then really zone in and deliver an experience that addresses that. So that, I think, is kind of the recipe for success. Thank you for your time, and hand back to David. Cheers.
So thanks, Dave. Very insightful presentation, a very interesting provocation in there. Slight degree of shameless advertising, but we leave that aside. If I could ask the other panel members, Joe and Conor, to join me on our virtual stage here. Together with Dave, we will kick off the panel discussion. Just before that, just to say that if you've got a question that you'd like to ask any of the members of the audience, please use the question facility. So Pete and Paul already have got questions posted, which is great, but we leave some time towards the end to come back and pick up those questions. So Joe, I might start with you if that's okay. So I think everybody's probably familiar with the impact that the restrictions of COVID-19 have had on customer behavior, and particularly this kind of real focus around digital engagement. But as you kind of look at customer and think about customer and look forward, what do you think the needs and the requirements of customers going forward will be around digital banking? Where do you think that the emphasis will be?
Okay, well, thanks very much, David, and thanks for the invitation to be here today. I think, yeah, COVID has definitely accelerated some behaviours, and much of the audience, probably from banks, they'll probably have found an immediate change in terms of how they've behaved internally. For me, from a customer point of view, and some of the things Revolut focuses on already are areas of control and responsiveness to consumers. So I think going forward, they're going to become bigger and bigger themes, because I think the financial services industry is well behind what consumers experience in other industries, and we're kind of in catch-up mode. So some of the things, I suppose, to explain what I mean when I say control. For example, Revolut tries to give you a payment in a way that is a different experience, insofar that it looks like it's an instant payment, and it looks like that because you can see it arriving. So if you're the recipient and someone says they've sent you money, it arrives immediately. So that straight away gives the consumer more control when it comes to managing your money and budgeting. And I think this is something that's going to become more important now as we enter a recession. Again, rather than just doing what everyone else does, which is to say, I'll give you some basic analytics, is we give you some additional features that let you control things. So for example, with Revolut, you can self-impose a spending limit on your own card, rather than having the bank do that to you. So then your card can reject, you can cause your card to reject at the point of spending. And I've been a victim of that myself. One morning I missed the train because I did it. I set a limit on myself to see if it worked, forgot all about it. And then when it worked, I missed the train because my card rejected. So it gives you that kind of control as a consumer. Likewise as well, I kind of a byproduct of us launching open banking for Ireland is that the transactions that come into the Revolut app from your other bank account, we'll be able to include those in our budget analysis. So what was already a tool that some of our consumers really liked is going to become more powerful in helping them to see their two accounts, because let's be honest, most people are using the Revolut product as an additional or companion account at the moment. So to get the best out of that budgeting insight, it would be useful to get both accounts working together. In other ways, you can control your card by having more security features that you're in direct control of, like you can switch off the mag stripe, or you can switch off online shopping, or you can switch off contactless payments. So again, we let consumers kind of almost design the functionality that they want by giving them that level of control. If for some reason you don't like using your card online, you can create a virtual card to use on a once-off basis. So you can create a card number, and then it's useless if it was ever intercepted or stolen or whatever. And then you can take it to other areas like saving as well. And you're probably now again going to see more and more people struggle to save. Some consumers just, they spend their money on their kind of day-to-day expenses. They don't have money left over to a standing order. But by offering something as simple as allowing you to round up your spare change, put it in a little savings vault or a little pocket, that builds up over time, and it creates a slightly different feeling for for the customer. You are making some savings. Likewise as well on collaboration. I think that's another area where consumers are constantly collaborating in other spheres, but maybe not to do with finances. So again, the simple thing, if you've tried the product out where you can split a bill and it can be done quickly and instantly, that's a nice way to collaborate with friends. You can also contribute to a group fall, so you can save together for a thing, and that's something that people quite commonly do as a use case, but it's not really met as a need by anyone in the market. So all those kinds of trends are things I think that we're going to see more and more of. The other theme I think is responsiveness. So who's reacting and changing and creating new things or new services based on what their customers want. So for us in Revolut, I think really slick interface. It's something that any of us who studies other industries tries to learn from, and how easy and frictionless some services have become. Even things that were complicated and horrible to do 5 years ago, some companies have worked so hard at them that they're now easy to do. And payments is the great example for us. So when David talks about the young affluent segment and being attractive to them, and it just means you make it easier and easier, and they're willing to embrace it. To the point that Revolut in certain segments, people use it as a verb, and they say, I'll Revolut you the money, rather than I'll send you the money, or I'll get you the next day or whatever. And I think that in recent months, again, I've heard students are kind of saying things like, I'll rev you for it. So again, they're abbreviating it, and just for me, that's constantly working at trying to make the process easier will help people to engage. And I see that demand continuing to grow. I don't see these major trends that smartphones have unleashed, where it's easy for people to do things, and things that were complicated, and or you could say things that were very cash based, and that are now going to be easier to do. And I think two other ones, just to mention briefly, we've launched a debit card for children. So if you're a parent and you want to give your child a debit card of their own that you control, so you control how much money they have, and you can see every single transaction that they do on it. I think launching Revolut Junior is going to be interesting to see how do parents going to react to that, and do they use it as a way to teach their children in a practical way about money and managing money. And of course, open banking itself, I think we're just at the beginning. I know lots of companies are working on it, and there'll be lots and lots of companies that produce AISP and PISP services. And I think that's a great start point for Ireland now in terms of where to go next with trying to create new things and new services for customers. And we can't necessarily imagine and give everyone the answers and say this is what it's going to be like 5 or 10 years from now, but I think that's a fairly fundamental enabler and a great opportunity. So I'd agree with David's earlier comments on that.
Thanks, Joe. Revolut Kids is definitely of interest to me. I think all the other members of my family spend on my credit cards, so the university doesn't seem to spend on them. Conor, just interested in your thoughts. So obviously from Leveris, you've kind of got a different perspective in terms of how you might look at this. Interested in any other thoughts or insights you might have in terms of what you think about, customer needs and requirements moving forward?
Yeah, well, I think you sort of asked two questions around COVID and then kind of customer, needs. I think COVID, to a certain extent, is a bit of a red herring. I mean, I don't think it's a case that before COVID, you really wanted to walk 2 kilometers to a bank and stand in line for 20 minutes and fill out a 15-page document to be told that you forgot 3 things, you have to come back tomorrow, but we're closed tomorrow, So I think when you're asking the question around what do consumers want out of digital banking, I think we know what they want, because it's the same things that they always wanted. It's just a case that maybe the technology or the business models or the digital ecosystems weren't there to give it to them, right? And I think as the innovators and the challenger banks continue to rise the bar, those expectations will change. Like I agree with everything that Joe says, and there's so much functionality that's great within the Revolut app, but also within other challenger banks, right? And when we started looking at it back in like 2014, Revolut and Starling, these kind of banks weren't actually launched at the time. Really, we just had N26 in Europe, and we used to look at a Simple Bank in America a lot. We looked at the features that they had, which Revolut have a lot of them now as well, and we tried to understand, what exactly are these features giving customers? Why are they actually adopting them at such high rates, right? And the 2 features that they had at the time was saving pots was one, which Revolut executed very well, and we thought, like, what's the psychological demand for that? Like, why is that so good? And really, it was about mimicking the the mental accounting that people do in their brains in terms of, I've got to have 15 euros next week to pay for my mother's birthday, and I've got to have money on Sunday to go out and whatever it is. And they compartmentalize money, right? Even though it's fungible, they don't treat it as such, right? And then the other thing was, safe to spend, this idea that if I was looking at a discretionary spend, my bank would actually tell me not what my current account balance is, which can be kind of, not very informative as to whether you could actually, buy the thing you're looking to buy, but told you what your current account balance was less every commitment you had between now and payday, right? So when we analyzed those, we were thinking like, what exactly is happening there, right? And it was really about relieving anxiety, right? It was about helping me understand my money so that I didn't feel anxious when I was paying for stuff, and when I didn't feel anxious about planning for my future, right? And the other big driver outside of psychological drivers are basically practical drivers, right? It's all about, I want to do things quickly, and the bar has been raised, like Joe said, because of, I can order a taxi and get a date with the click of a button. Why can't I do it in banking, right? And I think when you look at the digital services that all the digital challenger banks have now, I think those truths and those trends are coming through. It's about it's about driving it through practicality and helping me do things quickly so I can spend time on the things I want to do, and that's especially true in business banking, right? And then secondly, it's that relieving me of stress about my finances and helping me plan for the future. And they were really the first steps on the way to banks finally being trusted financial advisors and sort of benevolent custodians of my data, as opposed to just somebody that sells me financial products, right? So I think, and I think the logical conclusion and the logical extension of that is in sort of what you would call contextualized financial services within large ecosystem plays. And maybe we can talk about that a little bit later.
Thanks, Conor. Dave, just to pick up on, staying on this customer theme, but just to pick up on, I guess, some of the points that you were making around how the needs of different segments of customers are quite different. You kind of focused particularly on the SME. I mean, I think that's be interested in your views as to how different segments who have different, I suppose, requirements can be met. A one-size-fits-all approach really doesn't work. How do you approach that from a broader digital banking perspective?
Yes, so I just might say one thing before we get into that point, because I think there's three things that just totally stand out to me as, Conor's point about it's not new, it's just accelerated. But in that post-COVID world, is like there's three things that we're never going back to. One is cash, contactless payments is an absolute winner. Two, automated onboarding is an absolute winner out of it. And, that was just slipping my mind, but those are the key things. I think that, e-signatures, like those three things have been accelerated forward, and we're never going back, I think. In terms of meeting the unmet needs, it's really starting off by doing your research. And, I'm sure there are lots of people in the audience, and we're not going to drain it, but like this is where you get your service designers in, and you do your market research, you get people in the room, you get your focus groups, and you really start to try and unpick what they need. The key I always try and stress to people when they do that is forget about what you have today. That's probably the biggest thing that you need to try and do, is forget about where you are today and focus on where you want to be.
Thanks, Dave. Conor, I might just come back to you. So I think we've done research across EMEA around digital banking, and I don't think it's a surprise, but Ireland kind of lags in terms of where it's at in digital banking. But as you kind of look forward, where do you see the potential winners in this space in our market? Is it the incumbent banks? Is it some of the digital challengers? As Joe kind of referenced some of the things that Revolut are doing, or perhaps is it even big tech, the Googles, etc., Amazons of this world playing into financial services? Who do you see as the winners? Who do you see as the kind of the players who dominate in this space going forward?
Yeah, well, look, I guess if you bring it globally, right, I think the short answer is that there'll be winners and losers in each of those sort of cohorts that you mentioned, right? There'll be big winners in terms of incumbent banks, there'll be big winners in terms of the digital challenger, and the big winners in terms of big tech, right? I think an easier question to answer maybe is, what are the things that you'll have to do in order to win, in order to dominate, or even to be relevant for that matter, right? What are the digital experiences that you'll have to bring to bear onto the market in order to win and to dominate? And what are the, I guess, the digital ecosystems and the business models that you'll have to try to either establish yourself or navigate your way through in order to win, right? And I think banks have to take a kind of a practical approach to it. I mean, in the short to medium term, banks have to continue to focus on digitization, and for all the reasons that we spoke around convenience and about removing friction and removing stress out of your banking and moving towards that idea of a trusted financial advisor, right? But if that's only what your thinking is, and you're just thinking about digitizing an analog product and sort of replacing a branch with an app, I'd be pretty concerned about that in the medium to long term, right? And I think it's showing a misunderstanding of the power that digital ecosystems are going to play in the future, right? And there's different types of digital ecosystems. There's some that are owned by banks, and Tinkoff is a very, very good example. Most people are not very familiar with the Russian banking scene for obvious reasons, but it is light years ahead of where we are in Europe. And Tinkoff have got to the point where you almost can't describe them as a bank anymore. They don't present as a bank. It's more of a I guess a lifestyle kind of ecosystem that they've built, right? And when you watch what Revolut are doing now, they seem to be on the same path. And maybe Joe will tell us all about that strategy, maybe, or maybe he can't, right? But then there's also digital ecosystems that won't be controlled by the banks, and you have to think about them in terms of the power. Not only the potential for distribution, but the distribution power. Sorry, not only to be afraid of the disruption that they can cause, but also to use them as a means of distribution, right? You can talk about Tinkoff, you can talk about WeChat, you can talk about Revolut. Two that I'm looking at very carefully at the minute is one is Heneghan, right? So Heneghan they really they really understand the power of these large marketplaces, right? And they get it from both sides of it in terms of marketplaces that they can control, but then also marketplaces that they can partner with, right? And they probably have the most advanced, most successful digital strategy in the world. So, like, on one hand, they have their own ecosystems, such as like Autohome, which is essentially the world's biggest, car marketplace, right? But they're able to surface up car finance and car insurance at the point of need, and I think that's where financial services is going ultimately, to this point of contextual financial services, where it arrives at the point of need, but is otherwise sort of slightly unobtrusive, right? But they also, of course, expose their own services via APIs into other third-party ecosystems. So you have the likes of airlines that can, as you're going on the booking journey, you can actually get Heneghan insurance, travel insurance, right at the point. So they're really understanding the dynamics and the power of these ecosystems, right? The other one, which is a little bit more embryonic in stage and one's a little bit closer to home, so it's really interesting to watch it evolve, would be what Goldman are doing with Marcus, right? So they initially, orchestrated the Marcus platform for I think it was installment loans originally. Then they went to England and started raising enormous amounts of deposits, right? But then, of course, they launched the again, a little bit like Heneghan, they started thinking about what are the partnerships that have large distribution models that I can partner with, right? So they launched Apple Card, obviously. David Solomon said that was the most successful credit card launch in the world ever. I don't know what metrics he was talking about there exactly, but it was clearly a big success. But recently they announced the partnership with Amazon, which is even more exciting, right? So you think about Amazon, again, an enormous distribution network. Marcus then are able to bring, I guess, finance at the point of need to merchants within the Amazon platform, right? So again, the platform is being used within their own ecosystem, but also exposed to the other ecosystems, right? And I think the big winners that will be, in the medium to long term, are the ones that can understand those dynamics and trade-offs. Because I always think that a good product with amazing distribution will always beat a great product with sort of medium distribution. And I think a lot of the winners will come from that. Those companies that are building ecosystems like Revolut are the ones that can manage to partner with the ones that already exist.
Thanks, Conor. Dave, might go to you with the same question. And in particular, you're probably close to some of the banks as well, and understanding what are the challenges the incumbents have, I guess, to overcome to try and, to win in this space as well, maybe as part of that question.
Yeah, so I might kind of reframe it a tiny bit, because like I think Conor's points about ecosystem are well made and completely accurate, because that is very much the world we live in, and there's undoubtedly a place for everybody in that ecosystem. I think there'll be winners and losers in the ecosystem, and I think for banks and incumbents in particular, the challenge is to be clear where they want to play and what is their purpose within that ecosystem. For me, that's the key thing, the first thing that the incumbents have to unpick. I think the second thing then that is beginning to play out and will very much accelerate, the days of getting your first bank account when you get your communion money, and getting your first student account and go on and staying with them for the rest of your life as the kind of, let's call it the main place that you get your financial services with. I think those days can probably be measured in months, if not years. I think we're moving into a much more fluid space, and again, I'm not referring to where does your current account happen to be. I just think we're going to move into a much more fluid landscape, and that's the two things I think for the incumbents: be clear on where you want to play or what your value proposition is there, and I guess realize that your business model is going to probably have to adapt to a more fluid base. Would be my two thoughts.
Thanks, Dave. Joe, what are your thoughts? You probably have a particular view coming from where you're sitting at the moment, and interest also in your view around kind of collaboration and ecosystem as well.
Yeah, okay. I mean, I think there's a difficult question about who's going to win out in the future. Obviously, it could be anybody, and I don't think the financial services sector is narrow enough that any one player or one type of player is going to win out. I think there's room for lots of winners in the market. There's room for losers too if you're going to sit back and watch the action and not get involved. So I think that's something everyone needs to bear in mind when industries go through lots of change. Overall, I think it's the best innovators that are going to really win out, or maybe become the bigger players in financial services. The challenge of that isn't just to do it once or to have even a good year or two. The challenge is to do it on an ongoing basis and build a strong business. That's certainly what we would pay attention to in Revolut, is that there are hundreds and hundreds of fintechs. There's loads of innovators. There's lots of people trying to do new things. And if we rest on our laurels for 1 minute, someone can come along and disrupt what we're trying to do. But I mean, larger and incumbent institutions in the financial services sector should feel that fear as well. They should be seeking to drive innovation. And I mean, the temptation is there to be comfortable always, and the temptation is there for a company like Revolut to be comfortable, to think, oh, we're doing really well on X. We just need to drive more of X. And for me, that reminds me of chasing sales in a boom. It's just like, as long as we get more sales, everything is okay. So if you're just counting widgets that you're selling and you're not still remembering that you're there to try and solve problems for customers, you're going to slowly run into trouble, and that someone else will be doing the innovating, someone else will be coming up with the new stuff, and suddenly you'll find, I've been flanked and somebody's got or outflanked and somebody's got something new. So I think that challenge is there for all businesses. I'd come back to the kind of key things I said earlier about control and responsiveness. I think consumers are into those things. They want things the way they can have them now, and through technology. Technology helps you to solve a problem. You can have things on demand. So, and that's, we've all embraced that as consumers. So we can look at ourselves, our personal experience, our family's experiences, and talk to people in different age groups and different backgrounds from ourselves, and hear what they have to say about technology and the tools that they use. So I think there's lots of room for winners. I think the big question is going to be who's going to respond to those needs, and who has the ability to do that, because not everybody does. I do think as well firms can pick and choose their battles. Like, you don't all need to get out there and turn into some kind of massive ecosystem. It's probably not realistic. But you can't sit back and not engage in the fight or not pick a battle if you don't decide to do something that's new. I think there's a real danger that you lose relevance for your customers. And then a final point on ecosystem for us is that, yes, Revolut has a vision for its app to be a financial super app. So every organization probably finds a way to find a nice way of describing what it wants to become. It does mean that it's flexible, the concept being that it's a flexible piece of technology. We can take it to different markets and localize it for regulatory requirements and local practices in that market in terms of what consumers want, and we can add different products into it, and we can find different ways to do those. We can partner. We're not an insurance company, but we can sell insurance, so we can partner, or we can build, and so there's lots of flexibility in it. So yes, we can do something that looks like an ecosystem, but then again, we don't put an ad out there and say like, oh, by the way, here's a great new ecosystem, why don't you buy it? You've got to hone in, I think, on what really is interesting to a consumer, and what how are consumers changing in terms of their needs, and being tuned into that, and then being able to do something about it. I think that's pretty important in today's world.
Thanks, Joe. So last question before I go to the audience, because there's quite a few questions there. I suppose, Dave, is there a disruptive technology or disruptive innovation that potentially could have a big impact in shaping the future of digital banking? Anything that you'd kind of call out as something to watch over the next 2 or 3 years?
Yeah, so even though I'm a techie at heart, I have to say tech's like Lego. Okay, it's all there. It's the pieces that you pull together, and I think the example that I'd use is, if you take GPS or location as a technology, in 1990 it was operational for the first time in the Gulf War, being used by people. In 2000, year 2000, selective availability was turned off, and the EU and citizens all around the world could actually access it if you had the right device. 2004, Qualcomm made the first chip that allowed you to get it on a mobile phone. In 2008, the iPhone 3G arrived, the second edition, that had GPS in it. Right? The story is that the tech is there for a long while. The thing that has changed is the access, right? And once you got into 2004, you got access to mobile phones. Once it got onto the iPhone, it got access into the hand. It was probably about 4 years later that you got all the applications that actually started to use location as a technology within their various business and consumer applications. But I just did a quick kind of survey of my own phone before I came on this, and 42 of the apps on my phone, and I probably only have about 50 apps on my phone, use location, right? So if you kind of jump to the banking world today, if you go 4 years in the future, like I think with open banking, we're now at that 2008 moment. So it's all the things that are threaded together, with the various technologies, all the Lego blocks being combined to bring new experiences. So you could see in 4 years' time, financial data being in 42 of the apps that are on my phone, right? That's where I think this thing is going. So it's less about the tech and more about access to tech and the innovation through CX for me.
Thanks, Dave. Same question for you, Joe. Anything that you'd call out?
Well, my answer might be a little bit boring. I'm a great believer in the tech that we already have being a massive enabler, and that firms just aren't using it. So I think open APIs is a huge opportunity, and it needs a bit of creativity in terms of designing new services for customers. And I've seen some good hackathons I've been involved in the past, some great ideas, but firms not necessarily taking them on or believing in them in terms of the investment in order to bring them to life. So, that's one. The other one I'd mention is just something simple as a result of COVID and using video calling. It's always been there, yet in the traditional sector, banking sector, we would argue that, you need to maintain branches because some customers insist on seeing you face to face to feel like they're getting good advice. I've had my doubts around that ever since FaceTime came along. Now we have Zoom, multiplying up a massive number of factors over in terms of usage, and people starting to get used to it in a much greater scale. There's technology there that creates and presents opportunity for us as businesses. So I think you don't have to go to blockchain, which is the one they tend to talk about as being completely overhyped. It'll probably be amazing in 10 years' time, but there's loads of technology there now that I just think businesses should be using more and pushing themselves more with,
Conor, just to you,
yeah,
finally.
Conscious of time, I would just, I guess I have similar views to the guys, and I don't really necessarily think it's the technology that is the disruptor. I think it's more to do with the business models that evolve around that. And it's like what Joe was saying, it's about what people tend to do with the technology is sort of the real disruptor. I mean, AI is the obvious one, I suppose, because it brings, you know, that ability to analyze data to such an extent that enables new business models and enables, you know, platforms and that kind of thing.
Thanks, Conor. Okay, so I'm going to go to some audience questions now. First question is, what about the non-bank players leveraging AISP licenses to provide better insights into consumers' financial lives than a bank app can? Who'd like to pick that one up?
Yeah, Roger. I mean, I've talked a little bit about that. I definitely think that's possible, but I think we won't be the only ones to do it. And I'm sure there's loads of applicants in for AISP. It's a matter of time. I know there's a few live in terms of the types of solutions they're providing, I think, in terms of accounting and auditing for businesses. So look, I think that ground is ripe for innovation, and anybody can play in that space if they want to go through the process with the CBI and get their authorization. And I think it's exciting. And it puts consumers a little bit more in control of using their data that's accumulated in a bank, put it into the hands of other service providers, and trust them to provide some services. So I think that's definitely a big opportunity.
Okay, next question is probably for Dave. Do you think some banks will try and play both sides, i.e. stick for some demographics and products, but create a twist capability to take advantage of PSD2?
I think undoubtedly, and kind of going to, I think I'd hark back to Brian's comments around the heart surgery, right? You kind of challenge the incumbents have is to do both threads in parallel. I think clarity of purpose and setting yourself up the right way to achieve that, and also making some hard choices as you do that, both with your traditional stream and with the more forward-looking stream, is the key to unpicking it. I don't think you just wake up tomorrow and do something different.
Thanks, Dave. Joe, this might be for you, but a question about open banking. Is there any actual customer research to show that individuals will be prepared to release their full personal banking account data to a fintech or startup?
I think there is. I can't go back and tell you how the European Union decided it would be a good reason to do it, whether it was consumer driven or more just around breaking up the control of that data and allowing competition. But I think in the early couple of weeks we've launched it, we've seen plenty of interest, more so than they could all just be former colleagues in banks testing it out to see how it works. So yeah, we've got plenty of consumer interest. Whether it catches on or not is another thing. I think that would take a little bit of time. You know, we need more time to see that. But I think there will be, I would expect that there will be plenty of people. Ireland has a history of innovation. We've got a really strong financial services sector. We have a really strong tech sector in Dublin. I don't see why those two things aren't going to combine. You're going to see lots of innovation coming out. I think open banking can be a real catalyst in Ireland. I'd love us to have an even stronger fintech sector than has emerged at the moment. There's great support there from a number of organisations like the BPFI and FPAI. So we've got loads of hubs around town like Dogpatch Labs. So there's loads of supports. I think this data becoming available, I think, is going to be something that's going to drive new services. So I kind of watch the space, unless of course you'd like to get stuck in and get involved in the space, which I suppose I should encourage everyone to do, whether it's a competitor or not.
Thanks, Joe. Another question really around security and anti-fraud. How are panelists dealing with the need for additional security and anti-fraud?
In relation to COVID or just in general?
I think probably in relation to digital banking and the development of digital banking.
Yeah, well, I mean, at Leveris, while we've built, you know, the entire banking stack ourselves, we use, you know, third parties kind of where it makes sense. So for us, it's about choosing, you know, best in class partners, right? So like choosing the best in class partner for KYC and AML, choosing the best in class partners for transaction monitoring, for app shielding, and all of the things that go around, you know, protecting the account in terms of, you know, the integrity of the transactions, the privacy, also making sure that you're compliant in terms of doing PEPs checks and sanctions checks and fraud monitoring, both at onboarding and during payments.
I just add that I suppose if you're not relying on overnight batches and processes like that, if you're using more modern tech design, that there's a lot more potential to do real-time intervention to protect customers, to protect the firm, and to stop crime. So I think that's for me, that's exciting. It's one of the things I hadn't thought about before I joined Revolut. but we do have more sophisticated tools that can run in real time and take action. So I think that's a positive, and AI is going to play a greater role there over time.
I think that the comment I would add again is, I think one of the big challenges the traditional banks have is, again, it's not which tools to buy, it's trying to overlay that on a legacy estate. I think that's non-trivial.
Okay, one question just around payments and open banking payment functionality. How dependent is it on the widespread use of instant payments in the jurisdiction? Joe, you might want to field that initially.
I don't think it's dependent on it. So I mean, if you can instruct a payment using PISP, it's still going to be a slow SEPA payment. It'll still happen. It just won't be any faster than the normal one. So I guess the Irish banks need to, I suppose, organise to launch SEPA Instant in the Irish economy, and I know that they all have plans. I believe they all have plans to do that at some point. I think in the meantime, our little plug is that, well, if you want to, for 1 million consumers now in Ireland on Revolut, so if you want to have what looks like an instant payment, do it on that network. If you're inside a bank, obviously you can do an instant payment to another customer who's on the same bank in Revolut. That's the same thing. It's just that we might have a greater coverage than some of the smaller banks now at this point.
So this question may have come from a Revolut employee. With over 1 million customers in Ireland already, how will Irish banks compete with Revolut's superior proposition?
We don't have.
Yeah, I think just on that, I mean, I think, one of the enablers of Revolut's ability to innovate is the low cost base, because when they propose a feature, they can actually get it through a sort of a budget that makes it tenable, So for as long as the big banks are on this, enormous, technological footprint, which is so expensive and isn't flexible, it's going to be increasingly hard to match those feature sets and user experiences, because there's always a cost element to everything that you try to bring to market.
I think the other thing to consider is what if there's 50 Revoluts in 5 years' time, in Ireland? So you can't just keep sitting back saying, I just keep spending 500 million a year in my legacy stack, and that's going to somehow protect me from that. It's not going to be about Revolut. It's going to be about the fact that potentially some of the topics we've covered today, there'll be more and more change, more and more different propositions coming to the market. Different players will extend their service in, which will touch off bits of banking. So I think that's the challenge, and I agree with Conor. You're going to be sitting on a legacy stack. It's sort of potentially holding you back, and maybe some of the banks are looking at how they innovate around that and connect into the legacy stack for accounting purposes, and maybe that's the solution.
So just building on that a little bit, one of the questions here was how quickly will, I suppose, the challengers, I guess, in this space start to offer more kind of mainline banking products like mortgages? How quickly will that happen, do you think?
If it's a question to me, my answer is
you can answer.
Yeah. It won't happen that quickly because they're complicated. There's some of the more complicated things to do, and you think you need to be a bank first of all. Revolut's not a bank in Ireland or the UK yet, so it's some time away from us. And whether others could come in there and disrupt them, who knows? I think that's part of, I suppose, the point of this theme is that whatever you're most concerned about in your business, there are bound to be threats out there. So you should have a plan around that and what you're going to do to kind of defend yourself, or else go on the attack. In the meantime, when you're not waiting for someone to enter.
I think, David, just to kind of build on what Joe said, I think that to flip that question around, that also points out to huge opportunity space, I think, for some of the incumbents as well, in terms to think about their proposition at this point in time.
I mean, Conor had a piece in the paper at the weekend saying that they launched mortgage lending in, I don't know, the Netherlands or somewhere in the space of 12 weeks. So that was obviously a quick turnaround. So Conor had to be giving you a shocking plug, but I read that with interest,
Thank you.
Okay, just conscious of time, guys. Thank you very much for all of those insights. Really good discussion. Thank you to the audience for all of those questions. I really appreciate it. And just a final thank you to Brian and the BPFI for facilitating it. I think we're just on the 2 o'clock mark, so we'll end up there. Thanks to everybody who kind of joined us, and I hope you enjoyed that webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.